Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Chavav Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and today we are going to continue discussing the question of being merade es hapas, taking bread out of an oven on Shabbos. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanusunim Batzara Bashivia Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Bein Bayabasha Hamakom Yerachem Alehem Ve'etziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'Oru Mishiba L'Geula Hashta Bagol V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. And our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for David ben Belima. So yesterday we began discussing the question of being merade es hapas. Let's just remind ourselves what this is speaking of. Back in the day, the way they baked bread was they took the dough and they stuck it onto the side of the oven. That's how the bread became baked. In order to detach the bread from the side of the oven and remove it from the oven without damaging it, this took a particular skill. It was called being merade es hapas. There was a special tool, a special type of shovel or paddle that was used to pry the dough off of the bread off the side of the oven and take it out of the oven without damaging it. And this is what's known as being merade es hapas. Chazal tell us that ridui hapas is chochma ve'ena malacha. It's a skill. It's something that you need to know how to do, but it's not meleches iser on Shabbos. You're not performing any kind of malacha when you go ahead and you're merade es hapas and you take the bread out of the oven. However, there is an issue of uvda dechoil. When you go and you take the rachas, you take this tool that was used, this paddle that was generally used to do this, and you do it in the normal way, it looks like an uvda dechoil. It looks like you're a baker that's taking care of the oven and taking the bread out of the oven, and it looks like you're doing this on Shabbos. It looks like a weekday. You are doing it on Shabbos. It looks like a weekday activity that you're doing on Shabbos, so therefore there is a problem of uvda dechoil. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah that we saw yesterday in Ois Katan Lamed Hey, he said, "D'redias hapas lo have a shavus gomor." Ridui hapas is not mamish and issa d'Rabbanan, said the Mishnah Berurah. Ela mishum uvda dechoil is aser. It's a problem of uvda dechoil. And we said that the Mechaber seems to be following the Shita of the Ran, where the Ran says, yes, ridui hapas is a problem of uvda dechoil. However, if you had pas inside the oven, ba'ofen heter, if you put the dough into the oven on Erev Shabbos, and you put it in so that it was karmu paneha before Shabbos came, so now you did this beheter, and you did shehiyah on the pas inside the oven beheter, and you need this pas l'tzarech Shabbos. This is the challah, this is the bread that you need for your 3 Shabbos su'udos. So then, the Mechaber told us that you're allowed to go ahead and be merade es hapas. You could take the bread out of the oven using the regular tool, doing it completely in the regular way, because it's not a malacha. It's only an uvda dechoil issue. And since you had it in the oven, ba'ofen heter, and you need it l'tzarech Shabbos, we allow you to take it out in the normal way. But what are you allowed to take out? You're only allowed to take out what you need for Shabbos. Beyond what you need for Shabbos, you're not allowed to take out. That's what the Mechaber told us yesterday. Now, we go to Chavav Amud Beis, and we go to Sif Zayin on the top line here on Chavav Amud Beis, says the Mechaber, B'tanurim shalanu, by our contemporary ovens, she'ein bahem ridia, where there is no issue of ridui. We don't, that's not the way we bake bread anymore. We don't stick it to the side of the oven. We don't need this special process of ridui hapas, which is an uvda dechoil. Therefore, says the Mechaber, mutter lahoitzi yosem mishalosh seudos. You could take out more bread than just what you need for your 3 seudos of Shabbos, using besakin, but you should do it with a knife. You shouldn't do it with the regular paddle, or using any other kind of implement that you could stick into the bread and use it to pull it out of the oven. rachas, but you shouldn't use the regular rachas. Mishum de mechzikuvd in the chayil, because you have this issue. It's mechzikuvd in the chayil. So if you could do it using something else other than the rachas, do it using something else other than the rachas. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut membez she'ein behem ridia. Our contemporary ovens don't have this issue of ridia pas. The meleches ridia shalich rak betanureim. This skill, this process of ridia pas, was only necessary in the types of ovens that they had back in the day, where they would stick the dough, where they would stick the loaves of bread to those side walls of the oven. But by our ovens, where the loaves of bread are sitting on the floor of the oven, there is no problem of this ridoy hapas. Therefore, the Mechaber said, nowadays, using contemporary ovens, you're not restricted to only taking out what you need for Tzarchei Shabbos. Back in the day, when there was this issue of Ridi Apas being an Uvda D'Chayil, we restricted you. Even though you put the dough into the bread ba'ofen heter, you did the Shehiyah ba'ofen heter, still we restricted you, and we said you should only take out what you need for Shabbos. But, yeah. And what beyond what you need for the 3 Sudas of Shabbos, we said you're not allowed to take out even if you do it with a Shinui. But, says the Mechaber, that was only back in the day when there was an issue of Rida Apas. Now, with our contemporary ovens, we don't have that issue, so you could take out whatever you want. However much pas you have in the Tanner, as long as it was put in ba'ofen heter, as long as it was karmu paneha before Shabbos started, now on Shabbos you can take out as much pas as you want, but you shouldn't use the rachas. You should do it in a different way. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut mem gimel lahitzi yoser. The kasav of Magen Avram, the Magen Avram qualifies this a little bit. The kasav of Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, Dahainu, first of all, that like we've spoken, Dahainu kishehidbik beheter. So first of all, realize, we're assuming over here that the Shehiyah on the pas on Erev Shabbos was done ba'ofen heter. What does that mean? It was karmu paneha before Shabbos. And the explanation is, the betanurim shalahem, the type of ovens that they had back in the day where you stuck the dough on the side of the oven, even if you did the shehiyah ba'ofen heter, haya asur lahaitzi kol hapas, you weren't allowed to unload all of the pas that was inside the oven on Shabbos, she'ein tzarich lo l'tzarich Shabbos. If you had a lot of pas in there and you don't need it for your 3 sudas on Shabbos, you weren't allowed to take it out, even though you put it in ba'ofen heter. V'chanal b'sif hey, like we saw in sif hey, afilu al yedei shinui. Even using a shinui, we did not allow you to take the pas out of the oven on Shabbos when dealing with their ovens. Masha enken b'shalanu, but with our contemporary ovens, the loishayich redia, where you don't have the issue of ridoy hapas, because we bake the bread on the bottom of the oven, mutaloitzi kolapas, you can take all the bread out of the oven on Shabbos. Afshehu harbe, even if there's a lot of pas in the oven, the harbe yoisem yishalosh seudos, and a lot more than what you need for the 3 sudas of Shabbos at Shetzarek Leil Shabbos. Aval, however, kol zeh kisheroitza lechol mehem b'Shabbos al kol panim miktas mehem. This is only true, says the Mishnah Berurah, if you're going to use some of those chalos on Shabbos. In other words, the Mechaber is telling you over here that absent the problem of ridoy apas, you could unload the whole oven. You have 25 chalos in the oven. You put them all in on Erev Shabbos ba'ofen heter. They were all karmu panel before Shabbos. You're using a contemporary oven with no issue of ridoy apas. You could take out all 25 chalos on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's only true if you're going to use at least some of those chalas on Shabbos. What does that mean that you're going to use some of them on Shabbos? You're going to unload 25 chalas, and then you're going to look through them, and you're going to pick out the ones that you want. I'm going to take one well-done one, because I like well-done challah. Okay, there's a very doughy one. I'm going to take that one because my kid likes a doughy challah. This one is a little bit in between. My wife likes it like that. I'm going to take one of those. So the chalas that you need from Shabbos, you're going to be mevarer them. You're going to select them from the 25 chalas that you're taking out from the oven. That's when it's mutter to take all 25 chalas out of the oven. Aval, the imloikain, because if you're not going to use them at all, now again, doesn't mean you have to use them all, but you're going to choose from the 25 that you took out. You're going to use at least some of them. But if that's not true, the imloikain, if bichlal, you're taking out 25 chalas from the oven, and no, I'm not even going to look at them. These 25 chalas, not even bothering with them. I don't need them bichlal on Shabbos. The imloikain also l'rados l'tzar chayil. Then, even if you put the chalas into the oven on Erev Shabbos, ba'ofen heter, they were karmu panel, and you're using a contemporary oven, so there's no problem of ridu apas, you're still not allowed to take them out of the oven on Shabbos, l'tzar chayil. Then you're doing a tircha on Shabbos, l'tzar chayil. You're not allowed to do that. Va'afil tiltal ba'al ma'aser. Even handling them, tiltal, bichlal, is aser on these chalas that are bichlal not necessary for Shabbos. Kishuhu b'shvil chayil. K'maisha kasra paiskim, like the paiskim write, the aser lahavi yayin b'Shabbos l'tzarich maitzoi Shabbos. You're not allowed to go get wine on Shabbos from a lava malka. I'm not drinking this wine on Shabbos. No chance, no way. I don't need it. I'm not using it. I want to go get wine from Matzah Shabbos. You're not allowed to be matriach on Shabbos for chayil. You're not allowed to do that. Venera says the Mishnah Berurah, however, it would appear, Dal Yidei Eina Yehudi Shari. To ask an Eina Yehudi to do it would be mutter. And I believe the reason is because this is a shvus. At most, this is an Issa D'Rabbanan of doing a tercha on Shabbos for chayil. Okay, if you're asking a guy to do it, so it's a shvus to shvus. All right, shvus to shvus is not always mutter. Have to figure out over here why. What is this? A shvus to shvus? It's not a shvus to shvus, but makah mitzvah. I'm not sure. Ubesefer El Yerabba Bekel Agidei Atzmai B'Tanur Mishalanu B'Makah Pseido Sheyiskal Hapas. The El Yerabba takes the kula to another step. The El Yerabba says that if the breads are going to get ruined if they sit in the oven, so then this would be a shvus to shvus B'Makah Pseida, and then this would be mutter. The Magen Avraham says, why should I run to be matter you, to go be metaltal and go be matriach, to take out past from the oven that you don't need for Shabbos? Instead, what you should do is, you should say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to wash again, and I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to eat some challah, so I want challah. So I'm going to take out the 25 challahs, and I'm going to select the one that I want. In other words, make it l'tzarech Shabbos, and do it that way. Why do we have to be matir anything beyond that? The words of the Mechaber were that yes, if you put it in on Erev Shabbos, ba'ofen heter, so it was karmu paneha. Now on Shabbos, you could take out as many chalas as you want, but you shouldn't use the rachas. You shouldn't use the regular tool that was done for Ridi Apas, the paddle or whatever it was. Instead, you should take a sakin, anything, a stick, something that you could use to poke into the loaf of bread and take it out of the oven. When the Mechaber said that you should use a knife that you would stick into the loaf, he wasn't speaking beloshen dafka, that's what you have to use. You could use a stick. The point is make a shinoi. The near end, it would seem, says the Chavetz Chaim, if you're using the agency of an Eina Yehudi, you could even have and do it with a rachas, hu akli shadu mitzia by a pas b'choil. That's the regular paddle that was used during the week. 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, let's turn to Sif Ches. So, going back really to the beginning of Siman Reish Nun Gimel, when we first started tackling the issue of Shehiyah, one of the things that we saw was if you have basar chai, if you have raw meat, or you have a tavshil, a cooked dish like a cholent that contains raw meat, you could do Shehiyah on a kira that's not garfikotim. You could put it on right before Shabbos. Why could you do that? Because if it's raw meat right before Shabbos, meat takes a significant time to cook, and therefore, if you put it up right before Shabbos, you're going to be mesiach das from it. Your mind is going to be totally removed. There's going to be zero expectation of having that meat available to eat for the Friday night Suda, and therefore there's no kshash shemi yechata b'gecholim. You're not going to come to stoke the coals because you gave up on it. Why should you stoke the coals? Sure, it should be ready for the Shabbos day Suda. By the time the Shabbos day Suda rolls around, it's going to be ready without chitui. So therefore, we saw that if you put up something raw, you put up raw meat right before Shabbos, or a cooked dish containing raw meat, then there's no Isser, there's no problem of Shehiyah. There's no Isser D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah. Now, the Mechaber gives us an exception to that concept. Says the Mechaber, Lo Yamale Odom Kedera Asosiyos. A person should not fill a pot with asosiyos. What are asosiyos? Says the Ramah Pirish, mine kitnius. These are a type of legume, so some kind of a bean or something. Hagedelois be'eretz Yisrael, that grew in Eretz Yisrael, v'loi be'Bavel, and not in Bavel. V'termusin, termusin are another type of legume. V'yitain l'soi chatanur, or you cannot fill up a pot with these types of beans or legumes and then take the pot and put it inside the tanur Erev Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, Samach L'Chashecha, right before the onset of Shabbos. So, the Chiddush, we're going to explain it, the Mechaber is going to explain weiter, but the Chiddush over here is, I told you in Reish Nun Gimel Sif Aleph that if you're putting up something raw, Samach L'Chashecha, there's no Isser of Shehiyah. Why? Because you're going to be Mesiach Das, but not so by these types of legumes. These types of legumes, you cannot put them in a Kedera inside the Tanur, Samach L'Chashecha, even though they're raw. Why not? Says the Mechaber, because these types of legumes do not need a lot of cooking. Therefore, they can be ready for the Friday night Suda. Oh, if they can possibly be ready for the Friday night Suda, then you're not Mesiach Das. If you're not Mesiach Das, Shemi Yechata B'Gecholim. If there's a chash of Shemi Yechata B'Gecholim, there's an Isser of Shehiyah. Therefore, says the Mechaber, even if these types of legumes are not cooked at all right before Shabbos, they're totally raw. Harehem Kishar Tavshil, these are the equivalent of any other cooked dish, Shehiskil Lehispashel, that already started cooking, Veloy Nispashel called Tzarchai, but it's not fully cooked, Sha'asar Lahashaisai, where we said that there's an Isser of Shehiyah. Remember, if something is only Mavushal K'tzas, that's when you really have the problem of the Isser of Shehiyah. When something started cooking, so now it's already on the way, that's when we have a mokaim for a chash shemi yechata b'gecholim. Because since it started cooking, by doing chitui to accelerate the cooking process, you might have it ready for the Friday night Suda. That's really when the Isser of Shehiyah kicks in. So says the Mechaber, these types of legumes, since they don't need a lot of cooking, even if they're totally raw, halachically, they're the equivalent of a cooked dish that's mavushal k'tzas, because these can be ready for the Friday night Suda, so you might be mechata b'gecholim. Now, the Mechaber says, I told you that you can't put them in a kedera, in a pot, and then put them inside the tanur. Says the Mechaber, v'hu adin l'kira v'kupach. The same halacha would apply to a kira and a kupach. Let's first see the Ramah, then we'll explain this in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Ramah, Hagah, remember what we're speaking about here. We're speaking about an Isser of Shehiyah. In order for there to be an Isser D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah, we have to be talking, says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Ramah, Kishe'enam grufim uketumim. This issue is when you're dealing with a Tanur, a Kira, a Kupach that's not Gorafikotum. Since it's not Gorafikotum, that's when you could have the possibility of Shemi Yechata B'Gecholim. Or, and, says the Ramah, also the Efshar Lachatois. Also, we have to be speaking about a case where it's possible to do Chitui. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah and get into the weeds a little bit. But the concept we understand very clearly. The Iker Din, the Iker Halacha that the Mechaber is laying out to me over here is, if you have foods that could become ready with a very short amount of cooking, then you can't do Shehiyah on them right before Shabbos, even if they're totally raw, because these can become cooked very quickly, so you're not Mesiach Das. On the other hand, since you now expect them to be ready for the Friday night Suda, you might be tempted to be Mechata B'Gecholim to accelerate the cooking process. The details that we have to get into over here is, first the Mechaber said you can't put them in a pot and put them in a tanur. Then the Mechaber said the same halacha applies to a kira, and a kupach. Then the Ramah said, remember, this is all if they're not gorifikotum. Now let's dive into the Mishnah Berurah, and against the backdrop of everything that we've learned since the beginning of Reish Dun Gimel, let's get into the weeds. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Hey, Asasi Ois Fit Termusin. These are types of legumes. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hu adin l'shar minei kitni ois v'yarak oisu dvarim rakim. The same halacha would apply to other types of beans that can cook quickly, and vegetables that are soft, and other soft types of items that could become cooked very quickly. Shekulam einam doimim labasar. None of these are the equivalent of meat. The kaimalon le'el b'reish siman reish nun gimel. When it comes to meat, we said in reish nun gimel sif aleph, the mutter litnoi samach l'chashecha kishehu chai. You could put raw meat onto the kira, even if it's not gorifikotum. You could put it on the kira right before Shabbos. Because you give up on it. You mesiach das. It's certainly not going to be ready for the Friday night Suda. And for the Shabbos day Suda, it'll be ready without chitui. And therefore there's no mokum to be choishesh shemi yechata b'gecholim. Aval elu. But these types of foods, these types of legumes and soft vegetables, etc., kalim lihispashel, they become cooked very easily. And therefore we do have a chash of shemi yechata b'gecholim l'tzarech sudas halayla. Ois cotton memvav. So the Mechaber said you're not allowed to put them l'soich hatanur, inside the tanur. You're not allowed to do shehiyah inside the tanur. Says the Chavetz Chaim, hainu afilu hu garifikotum. When we're dealing with a tanur, and we say that you're not allowed to do shehiyah inside a tanur, remember what we learned. Kira is relatively large, straight sides, openings on top to rest two pots on. Those don't have a tremendously high degree of heat due to their size and their shape. So by a kira, if it's garif vikotum, you're always allowed to do shehiyah because it's garif vikotum. If it's not garif vikotum, that's when we have the restrictions of shehiyah. A tanur is like a pyramid. It's angled in. It only has room for one pot on top. That's a very high degree of heat. By a tanur, we said garif vikotum doesn't help. By a tanur, because of the high degree of heat, even if it's garif or kotum, you're still not allowed to do shehiyah. So says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Mechaber said over here that you cannot take these types of legumes and do shehiyah inside the tanur on Erev Shabbos, says the Mishnah Berurah, realize, since we're talking about a tanur, hainu afilu hu garif v'kotum. By a tanur, it would be aser, even if the tanur is garif v'kotum, because garif and kotum does not help by the high degree of heat of a tanur. Kamaisha kasam b'simin reish nun gimel sif aleph. Miu, tanure didon, but contemporary tanurim, like we've seen many times, dam yolikira. Those are the halachic equivalent of a kira, deshari garif v'kotum. Grifa and ketima help by a kira. Our tanurim are the equivalent of a kira, and therefore grifa and ketima would help by our tanurim. So if it's garif v'kotum, go ahead, you could do the shehiyah. V'emu tuach betit, and how about if it has a door that's sealed with clay? Shari b'chalinyan. That's always mutter, kifi macha kasav haramah b'sif aleph b'haga, because once it's tuach betit, according to the Ramah, we're not choishish that you might break it open and do chitui. And that's also what the Ramah means over here with his last words, the efshar lachatois. If it's tuach betit, it's not efshar lachatois. Ois cotton mem zayin, the Mechaber said, the Ramah said, that when we say that the same halacha applies, that the shehiyah is aser by a kira and a kupach. So the kira and the kupach are less hot than tanurim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, She'ein and grufim, akira levad koi. When the Mechaber says that you're not allowed to do this shehiyah with these raw legumes, the Ramah says that's only if it's not garif v'kotum. But if it is garif v'kotum, then shehiyah is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hold it, not so fast. That's only true by akira levadkoi. Why? Because we learned earlier in Reish Dun Gimel, again, grifa and ketima doesn't help by a tanur, grifa and ketima don't help by a kupach. V'nokat lashon rabim. So if so, why did the Ramah say kishe'enon grufim uketumim? Those words mean when they are not garafakotum. Now, if you're telling me that the Ramah was speaking about only the kira, not the tanur and not the kupach, so why does the Ramah use a lashon rabim? Kishe'enon. He should use a lashon yachid. Kishe'enoi. When it is not garafakotum, only going on the kira. Answers the Mishnah Berurah, the nakat lashon rabim. The reason the Ramah uses a lashon rabim is because a kirois ta'alma. He's speaking about kirois in the plural. Kishe'enon. When they, the kirois that we're talking about, your kira, your neighbor's kira, and your friend's kira, when they're not kotum, that's when you have this issue. The ilu kupach. Because you can't say that the Ramah is going back on a kupach. The kupach was the middle madrega. The kira is the coolest. The kupach is hotter. The tanur has the most extreme heat. We said that grifa and ketima never help with a tanur, no matter what you fueled it with, even if you fueled it with kasha givava. We said that grifa and ketima will help by a kupach if you fueled it with kash and givava, but not if you fueled it with eitzim that makes coals. So over here, it says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Ramah says that kishe'ein on grufim uktumim, it can't be going even on a kupach. You can't say that if a kupach is gar for kotum, you could do shehiyah. That would depend on what you fueled it with. Not if you fueled it with eitzim. If you fueled it with eitzim that makes coals, grifa and ketima don't help. Okay, now let's go weiter in the mechaber, 2 lines off the bottom near the end of the line. So, you can't do shehiyah with these types of, we'll call them kale habishul, these types of foods that can become cooked very, very quickly. You can't do shehiyah on them, even if they were raw right before Shabbos, because you're not going to be Mesiach Das. Therefore, there's an issue of Shem Yechata B'Gecholim. Well, what if you did do shehiyah? So you did shehiyah be'isser. So again, we keep on coming up against this issue. What's the halacha when you were over on the Isser D'Rabbanan and you did shehiyah? What's the din of the food? Says the Mechaber. V'em asakain afilu b'shoigeg. If you did this type of shehiyah, which is Isser D'Rabbanan, even if you did it b'shoigeg, asurim l'moitzai Shabbos ad kedei sheyeyasu. The food is going to be asur on motzai Shabbos if until the amount of time passes, the amount of time that it would have taken to do this cooking after Shabbos. And again, this follows the rule that we've seen consistently, which is when you're over the Isser D'Rabbanan, even if you're over the Isser D'Rabbanan b'shoigeg, and now cooking takes place be'isser on Shabbos, if you have significant hana from that cooking that took place be'isser on Shabbos, the food becomes asur ad motzai Shabbos b'chdei sheyeyasu. So you put the cholent on, it was a partially cooked cholent, it wasn't k'maychel ben drusai, and it wasn't raw, and you did shehiyah on a fire without a blech, it's not grufa, it's not ketuma. Even if you did it b'shoigeg, it's going to be also b'moitzai Shabbos ad sheyeyasu, because you got significant hana from the cooking that took place on Shabbos. Before Shabbos, it wasn't royal achila. Now on Shabbos, it became royal achila. So that's it. You can't use it on Motzei Shabbos. So to over here, you put up these easily cooked legumes, even though they were raw right before Shabbos, you're not allowed to do that. That's shehiyah d'Rabbanan. Even if you did it b'shoigeg, doesn't matter. You got significant hana, it became cooked on Shabbos. It's asur ad motzai Shabbos b'chdei sheyeyasu. The one exception that we saw yesterday was the pas. If you did shehiyah on pas, you put the dough into the oven, it didn't have enough time to be karmu paneh before Shabbos, then we had an exception. We said, if you did it b'shoigeg, we're going to allow you to use on Shabbos the lechem that you need for mazayin shalosh seudos. And we said, why did we make this exception? Because what choice do we have? We need to allow you to have lechem to eat your 3 Shabbos seudos, otherwise you're going to be bavatal the mitzvah of having your 3 seudos on Shabbos. So that's why we made an exception in that case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Cotton Memches, Ad Kedei Sheyeyasu, Kedei Shelo Yehane, Mimasha Avar L'Isser D'Rabbanan. We can't allow you to have Anah from this bishul that took place on Shabbos in contravention of an Isser D'Rabbanan. V'ayil b'siman reish nun gimel sif aleph b'hagah tim nisbashel mib'oy yom k'maychel ben drusai dai. It would be enough if it was cooked k'maychel ben drusai by the time Shabbos came in. Okay, last sif here in this wow Siman Reish Nun Dalet. Says the Mechaber Sif test, bottom line Chavav Amud Beis. Ki yoytzaboy, similar to the halacha that we just learned. Lo yamalik chavish shamayim. You're not allowed to fill up a jug of water. V'yitei l'soicha tanur erev Shabbos im chashecha, and put it inside the tanur on erev Shabbos right before Shabbos. So you filled up a jug with cold water. Cold water is uncooked water. So you have uncooked Michael over here. You have uncooked water, and you're doing shehiyah. You're putting it into the tanur on erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. V'yamosakain, and if you did it in contravention of this Issa D'Rabbanan, asur l'motzei Shabbos b'chtei sheyayasu. It will be asur to use this water on Motzei Shabbos until the amount of time it would take to heat up the water. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. It says the Mishnah Berurah on the bottom line of Chavav Amud Beis, Ois Kat Mem Tesh Shalmayim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Afagav Demayim Ru'uyin Lishtois Chaim. Wait a second. We learned a halacha earlier. We learned that when it comes, we learned this on Chavav Amud Beis in Sif Dalet. The Mechaber told us, let's say an apple. An apple is perfectly royal achila when it's raw. Since an apple is perfectly royal achila when it's raw, you could put it next to the fire around the kedera, around the pot, right before Shabbos. And there's no isser of shehiyah. Why? Because what chashash is there? A raw apple is the equivalent of a cooked dish that's already Michael ben Drusai. Adarabba, it's even better than a cooked dish that's already cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. Michael ben Drusai is only a third or a half of the way cooked. Yes, it's edible, but it's not fully cooked, so it's not perfectly ready to be used. A raw apple is perfectly ready to be used. So he said you're allowed to do shehiyah on a raw apple. Says the Chavetz Chaim, now the Mechaber is telling me you can't do shehiyah on water? Why not? What's wrong with cold water? Why can't you do shehiyah? Why will you be mechata b'gecholim? It's perfectly usable the way it is. Says the Chavetz Chaim, not so fast. You can't really draw a comparison between the water and the apple. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Afagav Demayim Ru'uyim Lishtois Chaim, even though it's true that water you could drink when it's raw, aka cold. So you would think this is similar to the halach of Sif Dalet of the apple. Nevertheless, you can't draw a comparison between cold water and an apple. Yes, an apple is 100% ready to be used raw. People eat raw apples all the time. But water, when you want a coffee? Cold water? No. Heating up the water is a significant improvement in the water. You want a tea, you want a coffee. You can't compare the cold water to an apple, says the Chavetz Chaim, and therefore v'yesh behem gzeras chitoi, and therefore we do have a gzeras shebi yachata b'gecholim. Because yes, you might come to stoke the coals in order to have a hot tea at the end of your meal. Ois kat nun, again, we're being very medayik in the words of the Mechaber. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to take this water, put it in a jug, and put it l'soich hatanur, into the tanur. Says the Mishnah Berurah, tanur shalonu, our tanurim, contemporary tanurim, kishu garif v'katum, our tanurim have the din of their kira. A kira, if it's garif v'katum, if you had a blech, you would be allowed to put it in. So Batan Shalanu Kishugar Fakatum, Aikishu Tuach Petit, or the door is sealed with clay, Shari V'chanal. Aiskat Non Aleph, Erev Shabbos Simchashecha. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to do this Erev Shabbos right before Shabbos. Elo imken yeshos sheyischamumu kaidem bein hashmashos. The Mishnah Berurah says, how much time do you need? At what point are you allowed to put the water into the tanur? How much time do you need before Shabbos? So when it comes to cooked dishes, this is a little bit easier. We say, okay, it has to be cooked k'Michael ben Drusai. So okay, Michael ben Drusai, halfway cooked. But with water, how do you measure how much time you need before Shabbos in order to do the shehiyah on the mayim? So the Mishnah Berurah says you need enough time. It has to become hot before ben hashmashos. Even if it's not fully heated. Okay, what exactly does that mean? So, I mean, from the Yeshiva Zatzal for Rav Moshe, it would seem that Yad Soledes, which means like your hand would jump out, which according to Rav Moshe, I think about 160. So Yad Seledes, the Rav Moshe seems to say, I believe, that Yad Seledes by Mayim is the equivalent of Michael ben Drusai, if you hold that Michael ben Drusai is a third of the way cooked. Okay, so how hot do you need the water to be? I think you need it to be a little bit more than Yad Seledes. Elim ken yeshoy is chamu mukenim ben hashmashas actually is chamu kol tzarchan. V'chein similarly also litain mayim l'soich akteir shepetanur erev Shabbos imchashecha. You're also not allowed. We referenced this mitzias a little bit earlier on, and that is they had these ovens that had some kind of a water tank built into them, and you would always have to keep that water tank full, because if you didn't keep it full, they would plotz, they would bust. So says the Chavetz Chaim, it would also be usher to put water into that tank. Erev Shabbos im chashecha, afagav de biskavin rakshali yipaka akdera. Even though you're really only putting it in there not to use the water, you're putting it in there so that it shouldn't plotz. So to do shehiyah, to put water into that tank, Erev Shabbos samach lechashecha, just so it shouldn't plotz, there's no chshash shem yechata b'gechalim. Why would you be mechata b'gechalim? It's not pshat that you want to hurry up the heating so you can have a hot tea at the end of your Friday night Suda. You just want to make sure that the tank is full so it doesn't bust. So you don't care if it's hot, you don't care if it's cold, you don't care when it's going to get heated up. So what's the problem of shebi yechata b'gechalim? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, this hot water was used for washing dishes. And therefore there is a chashash of shemi yechata b'gechalim because you want the water to get hot for the dishwashing. And therefore, if you do have a tanner with that kind of tank, you have to make sure that it's going to be at least somewhat heated before Shabbos. Wow, what a siman. Reish and Gimel, Reish and Dalet, Baruch Hashem, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. We got through it. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The schus of Liman HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua Sefuas Parnas and Shadupkim to those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gold Tzedek B'meher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.